Good day to you as we finish off class with this final instructor video, once again coming to you from Mazatlan, Mexico, which is appropriate in a way because this final book chapter has to do with thinking about the future. And Mexico is a country that is very much poised to deal with the future. It has a lot of potential. I'll see if I can work that into the discussion. Most of the chapter is covering material that was covered before. There's some summary material there with some new venturing out into areas for future research. So I'm not going to go too heavily into those areas. I'll spend more of my time adding my own thoughts to those areas. So let's make the first point, and that is that the world, if you look at it today compared to the history of human beings and their communication, the world today is a much smaller world. And the book describes quite clearly how people used to live in individual pockets and they never had any interaction with each other, those groups. They were separated by bodies of water with no ability to get across them in boats, etc. Fast forward to where we are today, and we have people who have long since had just virtual relationships and virtual cultures. That means having never met another person and still they belong to the same culture they do by virtue of where they hang out on social media or what they do on the internet in general. So look at how it was in the past and how it is now. And the book makes a point, I think a little bit late, that culture was what was defined as what had to be overcome for these peoples from these two different geographic regions to get along with each other. Their culture had to be overcome. And the book also goes into suggesting, at least I believe, is the term culture even really relevant today? Because culture has become so obtuse, which is spread out and confusing, that it's difficult to know whether culture has any meaning that holds together in and of itself as a core concept. I still return to the idea that culture is the way that we practice our everyday lives. And if you stay with that definition, I think culture is still relevant. But that's for you to decide. At any rate, the book then goes into a series of summary items that it talks about that have an impact that cut across cultures, one of them being religion. Religion, I think it's fair to say, is the oldest source of both human identity and conflict. Just think about that statement, the oldest source of human identity and conflict. When you think back to the Crusades, for example, when you think back to the bloody mythologies of the way that gods have become immortalized, when you look at the problems between Muslims and Christians today, and Jewish people and Arabs, a lot of it is based on religion. I've only covered a couple of them there. So it's both the oldest source of identity, the way that people define themselves, and is also the oldest source of human conflict. Where do we head in the future? It's tough to know. I know that the United States is becoming more secular, which means people less identify with believing in a God. But in general, it is still very a religious country. I'd like to move on now, after you decide for that one for yourself, and talk about how class used to play more of a role, the book argued, saying that when Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto, which was critiquing the way that a few people owned most of the wealth of the factories, and the people who worked there got paid very little, and the people who owned the factories, they enjoyed the spoils while the other people suffered. That was class capitalism, and that's what gave rise to the theory of communism. But since communism has failed in several states, with the exception today of Cuba still alive and China as well, though it's a modified version of communism, the book makes the case that class is not as relevant today. I disagree with that. I think class is relevant today, maybe even more so. We know there's a widening gap of income, wealth in the United States. There are fewer people are in the middle class, and they're more in the lower class, while more people are in the upper class. So the middle class has shrunk. So that's one thing I think that argues against that we do have a class system in the United States that's still present. It does still matter what you wear, what you drive, where you go to school. Those things do have a bearing in the way that we communicate with each other. So again, that's for you to consider. Keep in mind the U.S. does have half of the world's wealth. That's a lot of wealth concentrated in one country. So it does speak to the ingenuity of the private profiteering system. But then again, we have a lot of poverty here, which you don't see. You don't see burned out, bombed out houses in France, for example, or Sweden, like you do in the U.S. So we have the highest of the high and the lowest of the low. Next up, as a cut across the country category, is gender. Gender, we talked about that just recently in the class, but the whole idea of gender like culture breaks down as a concept. If you look at that queer theory that we talked about, where gender is really a continuum, there's no either or, then the idea of gender kind of breaks down. And just to hit one more point at home, that where countries or cultures tend to have high income disparity, means people making a lot of money, a lot of people making very little money, and no in between middle class. In those kinds of countries, there is also high fertility rates. So countries like right here in Mexico, still a high fertility rate because you have a lot of poverty. I see very, very young females pushing babies around in strollers all of the time. Next up is race and skin color and ethnicity. And again, Mexico comes to play here that generally speaking, the darker your skin, and there are various grades of darkness because you have the Spanish people who mixed with the Aztec people, and who mixed with Caucasian people. And so there's a lot of different gradations. So the gradations are various different degrees of brown in Mexico, and it does still make a difference. Those being the darkest of brown, you don't see them in the highest positions in companies or making executive decisions. They seem to be doing a lot of manual labor and using their hands to get by. So think about that idea across the world: race, skin color, and ethnicity. Especially when you watch the news, you can see a lot of ethnic conflict going on. Next up is the idea of civilization. Civilization, which is understood to mean progress. That when you are a civilized country, you have water, sewer, you have people a chance to educate themselves, get better. That's civilization in progress. But in Muslim countries, some of them, that kind of progress is not seen as a good thing. And even in Pennsylvania, as we noted, the Amish don't see that kind of progress, if it's necessarily defined as technological improvement, is a good thing. Some people may say, oh, it's so exciting to live in today's day and age with all the ways that we can communicate. Others might say, well, you know what? It's really complicated life, and I really would like to harken back to a time where we didn't have to always be glued to our phones, if we could just forget about them. So there's two different ways of looking at civilization. And then let's move to the item of the nation state. The nation state, remember, is a pretty modern phenomenon. People were nomadic. They were moving around, going to where the natural resources are and leaving areas that were destroyed by hurricanes. And people did not recognize borders that much, but borders started to come into play. And today we have the nation state. Our borders are very tight. There's a lot of talk about borders in the United States and whether they're actually not tight enough. But our perception of what our geography is, that's kind of where a nation state is today. And so when you have countries that feel that they have a population in another country that is more ethnically related to that mother country population, as was the case with Russia and the Crimea, which used to be part of Ukraine, but has more in common with Russia culturally, one could argue, the Russians went in and took it. So that's another threat. Another threat to intercultural communication is the nation state. Speaking of threats, that's kind of where the book heads into wrapping things up. The threats to culture around the world, there is a perception that the U.S. is overbearing, primarily because of our media exports, and that it's kind of like if you're in the room and one person's dominating the conversation, that's kind of like at a very simplified level how some cultures in some countries feel about the U.S. It's got the biggest and the loudest voice, and those countries are not getting heard. Case in point, when was the last time you heard a news story from Costa Rica, for example, a country that generally gets good news stories, but was reported by a Costa Rican? Instead, it might have been reported by an American reporting on Costa Rica. There's a difference there. Smaller cultures, smaller countries want to be able to express their own culture. Also, there are threats to the environment. As the populations continue to grow, and also as the populations continue to be more mobile, people moving across the world, and they need places to live, and so you take developments and you build in those developments, then what happens to the environment? What happens to the air quality, to the water quality? What happens to the natural resources that are available in that particular area, like the oil in Nigeria talked about in the book? That's also a threat to cultural communication. And as an example, the book talks about Sweden with only 9 million people. It's not that many people, the U.S. having 325. Sweden with 9 million has absorbed 85,000 immigrants from mostly North Africa. What does that do? What does that do to intercultural harmony? All right, then the book heads into the promise of new media, looking towards the future. Is it a help or is it a hindrance? And I have to say, I kind of have one leg on each side of the fence on this one. I see mostly among young people, in particular, your age group, if you're between 18 and 22, I see a kind of a curtailing of human expression and thought and comfort with the world. And I have to say a lot of it is through cell phones. And I have to say related to posting on social media and the kinds of pressures that go along with that. And the what did this mean? And should I answer? And they haven't responded back. And is that about me? And there's just so many things that are created by social media that I think are in a ways not making it more possible to have intercultural communication. I ask you yourself, how many people do you communicate with on social media that you would consider to be from different cultures, people outside of all the different ways that we've defined culture in this class? They're just a different culture than you. And you can answer that question for yourself, whether you think social media are a help or a hindrance. I think the book finishes with a good idea, which I'd also like to finish on, and that is, as we go towards the future and people can continue to move around and mix, one concept that will be relevant is the contact zone concept. Where do we come into contact with each other? Is it when somebody knocks on your door and you answer it and you didn't expect them and that's how you meet them? Is it on a bus? Is it in a classroom? Is it on your phone? Is it on Facebook? Is it some other way that I haven't described? The contact zone, that's where we need to look at. That's where cultures interface and develop and grow and continue the subject that we've been studying in this class. So with that, I wish you all the best, and I hope to see you again in the future.